Hello, beautifuls. You're listening to Bliss and Grit. I'm Brooke Thomas. I'll be joined soon by my dear friend and co-host, Vanessa Scotto. On the show, we're talking about being on the embodied spiritual path, and what does that even mean? So what's a real evolution of our lives? How do we ultimately embrace everything, all the beauty and crazy, the joys and the messes, the bliss and the grit that is a human life? We're attempting to sort it out for ourselves here on the show. In today's episode, we're talking about life as an empath. A lot of you out there listening are empaths, and this actually sprung out of our last episode about energy. We realized how helpful understanding the energetic underpinnings of patterns has helped us to be in our lives as empaths. So if you're an empath or a highly sensitive person, or a sensey, as we like to say, you've probably gotten really good at some management techniques for how to not get overwhelmed by the world. Maybe you've encountered a number of well-intentioned people who teach techniques about how to shield yourself from feeling too much or getting overwhelmed. The problem is managing and shielding is hard, fatiguing work. So what if instead we could learn how to land in ourselves? I mean, really inhabit ourselves so that we don't feel like we're at the whims of our environment, and we don't also feel like we need to be vigilant against the environment and against our sensey selves? That's what we're diving into today. If you're enjoying the show, we would be thrilled if you left a review on iTunes or on our Facebook page, which is Bliss and Grit. You can also head over to blissandgrit.com and subscribe to hear updates on upcoming events we might have coming up. We're running our first digital sangha, our first event, which we call the Being Human series right now, and it has been so nourishing and so lovely, which is such a sweet, sweet, sweet group of people. So we know we're loving it. We know we're going to do some more stuff. So you can stay tuned to find out about that. One last note before we head into the conversation. As you might know, Vanessa and I swear. So if there are kids around, you may want to wear some headphones. Okay, here we go.
Good morning, Brooke.
Good morning, Vanessa.
I'm overly excited to record today's episode. And I thought I would just kick it off with a quote that we posted on social media actually yesterday. So you're all listening in real time, kind of. So here's how it goes. He says, "We need to be clear that each of us has our own responsibility, that it's not necessary for you to feel everything somebody else feels. What somebody else feels is theirs to feel. You may have access to it, but that doesn't mean it's yours to experience. There's sometimes an underlying infatuation with one's empathic ability, which can itself be problematic. Part of you may find it unpleasant to feel what's happening with people, but another part might like it. It's like eavesdropping on someone's energetic state. If we unconsciously find that pleasurable, then it will happen more and more. If, on the other hand, we're not actually that interested, we're not pushing it away, but we're not seeking it out either, then our attention goes where it is appropriate for it to go. Sometimes it's appropriate to feel what others are feeling, especially if you're in relationship with them. It can help you to understand them on a kinesthetic level. But you start to realize it's not necessary to go around feeling what everybody else is feeling when you're not in relationship with them. You realize their business is their business, not yours. So actually, we did get a lot of responsiveness on this quote. And last week, or last episode that we aired, we were talking about energy. And I guess what struck me so much about this quote, because it really struck me as powerful, was, recently you and I were talking about being empathic. And we were talking about how empaths are actually, in one way, super controlling. Like we act like, oh, I'm at the whim of my environment, but in reality, we're constantly reading the energy in an ecosystem and then trying to modulate it or trying to adjust it so that it's not disharmonious or it's not overstimulating. And as somebody who's a sensey and as somebody who works with a lot of senseys, something that you often get the sense of is that it feels like something's happening to you, right? Like you just have this hyperactive nervous system, right? As you talk about highly sensitive people, they'll describe it like you have this big antenna And it's like everyone has an antenna, but you have a very big antenna, and you're picking up on all the broadcast signals in this very strong way. And in that description, which feels apt, it's sort of like something's happening to you, and it will always be happening to you. And that the best one can do is manage that. And I feel like there are some experts out there that really speak at that level, like, okay, energy is always going to come, and so wear white and wash your hands and say a prayer and put up a psychic boundary with light, and they'll give you all sorts of management techniques. And I've used those in my life, and I found it kind of tiring. Like, it still makes it very tiring to be around people because you have to put attentional energy on management techniques. And I've also found that ultimately it didn't work so well. I would still go through a day with clients, and then I'd talk to an energy worker, and they'd be like, well, you're really absorbing energy. So in this last couple of years, as you and I have had the grace of finding perhaps maybe more refined teachers is a good way to say it, I recognized that, like, yes, I'm wired to be sensitive, and I think that's just part of how Vanessa came into this world, but that I have a gross level of participation in this pattern that I had never understood before. Working with Kieran, understanding when I worked with Kieran Trace that I have belief systems like I'm responsible for how other people feel, like it's my job to make people happy, like a more foundational one we can all have, like suffering is a problem, therefore it has to be fixed. And I could see those belief systems. And as I began to understand them, I could understand why I was doing what Adia pointed to, right? Like eavesdropping, like listening in and making people's business my business. When I studied with Judith Blackstone and when we finished her training, I could get a real visceral sense of how my coping strategy as an empath was to open my body so that I was always in connection with people so they would never feel a disharmony and it would never be unsafe. And there's a lot to that strategy, and so on and so forth. So I just thought a couple of things. One, it'd be really useful to talk about life as a sensey, life as an empath through this energetic level, the energetic dimension, especially including some of the strategies we've used to cope that now become very problematic for us and very uncomfortable for us, that all too often we could then feel kind of victimized by.
Yeah.
And to kind of shed some light on a different perspective than the one that I'd been hearing prior to, a year or two ago.
So much to say, so much to unpack.
I know. How's that? I just poured it all out.
No, it's good. I think it's super important. And you and I both know, because we have a chance to communicate with Bliss and Grit listeners, that like a lot of you listening find yourselves in the sensey camp and in the empath camp. And you and I have a huge passion about trying to aid in that kind of journey as much as possible. So yeah, this is really critically important. And, just listening to you to describe what I know in a very familiar way about like how to manage your life as a sensitive person, how do you use those tools? How do you feel safe? Even things like, just, take lots of recharge time alone, which is like a lovely bit of advice. And I utilize it plenty and I always will. But any of those management strategies, they just feel at a certain point just so fatiguing. Like it was exhausting just listening to you to describe it, even though I know the inner workings of all that advice so well. It's just like, it's heavy because, so those of us who are empaths, I would say that there's probably lots of reasons why people are sensitive or empathic. But I would say that probably high 90% of us had environments that required it. We had to leave ourselves and go into the other people, meaning home life, parents, siblings, maybe whoever was around in the household, so that we could scan what's going on with them, so that we could be prepared for what might be coming. And that might not even necessarily be big, catastrophic, explosive abuse, although certainly that's one thing for sure. It could also just be things like having a very highly anxious parent. And you love them and you feel that anxiety and you want to make it better. So you were like in them. Like, is today going to be a good day or a bad day for them? Oh, if I have trouble with my math homework, is that going to spike off anxiety? And so you're scanning your environment to keep yourself safe. So your life is already from a very early stage about managing your world, managing your environment. You learned it as a management tool. And the base of that, like the foundation of that, is a few different stories. Life is overwhelming. Life is too much. And I have to keep myself safe. And I have to keep myself safe by constantly using all this energy and all these strategies to scan my environment and jump out ahead of it and manage things. That's fatiguing, really fatiguing, which is why all of us wind up with endocrine disruption, all the adrenal burnout, all the autoimmune stuff. And there's a lot of great research about that too. Actually, I just got the book, The Body Says No by Gabor Mate, which I haven't read yet, but I'll fill y'all in when I do. Which he basically talks about this, that there are these certain health conditions that happen for these kinds of people, where our environment was so much and we couldn't say no in the moment. And so our body says no for us by shutting down or attacking itself.
That's so unfamiliar to me.
I know. It's so
why my mold thing happened.
Not at all. So we have that, right? Like that's how we grow up. And then along comes these people who are intending to help, or these strategies, whatever, who are saying, here's how to do more managing. Oh, you who have been managing your world since forever. Here's more management techniques. And it's like, oh, good, this one's going to keep me safe. And so it's like you just keep piling on the management. You just keep getting more and more and more and more tired. And at a certain point, and this is why it's a useful, timely conversation for you and I, at a certain point, you just bottom out on that. Like there's just no more managing you can do. And you start to question the stories that are making it required. The stories like life is too much. I'll never be able to manage it all. I have to keep myself safe. All these different stories start to become like, is that totally true? And you can pull the thread and they can start to dismantle. So you and I have started to, and I would say we're like maybe in the toddler stage, we've started to really, which by the way is like high level ninja warriorship. Like I'm not saying that in a demeaning way. It's just that I see just because I'm at toddler level, because I'm up on my feet and I'm taking my uncertain first steps, I can see just how much I don't have to manage anything. Like I can see the expanse of that pasture in front of me. And so it's so helpful to be able to like bring this to people, this glimmer of hope. There is a place where those stories don't have to run your life and you don't have to be managing things all the time. And it requires, there's so many different little avenues of conversation we could take on this, but so much of it requires letting go of the identity of yourself as the empath, which takes other identities like the helper, the good one, the nice one. I would say most of us have careers in healing arts of some variety or another, whether it's manual movement therapy, yoga teacher, therapist, social worker, nursing, like we're the helpers, right? And we're tired.
And even if you're not in that career, what I noticed is people can still self-identify as the helper when their job isn't aligned like that, right? So people could be on, a trading floor. They could be, in any role in the world, customer service representative, I don't know. And they can still find that within their life and their social circle, they are the designated helper.
Yeah.
They are the one that they're like, this may sound familiar to all of you. Like, they're the client who'll say to me, like, why am I at a party and people are coming over and telling me their problems? Or like, why, when I am so overwhelmed and overloaded, like, are my friends all also calling me to ask me for advice or, to be their rock? And it's like, well, there's something probably essential about that person where they know how to listen, they know how to respond. And some of that is probably fundamental to them. And then some of that, as you said, Brooke, it's our survival strategies, that we develop in order to cope with our difficult ecosystem. But I always liked, when John Welwood had said that our defenses are born of our gifts.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
It's
right?
both and it's not reject the empath in you, right?
No, because he's saying, ultimately, if you weren't gifted at it, you couldn't use it as a survival mechanism, right? And so that, Vanessa can't be the class clown if she's not particularly funny. I am funny.
You are.
Not class clown funny. That just couldn't be my defense strategy, right? Everyone's got their defense strategy. In my household, my sister had a way of kind of standing up to my parents and being a little more rebellious and kind of fighting and standing her ground a little differently than me. I was more the harmonizer, the person who ameliorated conflict. Why? We just had different aptitudes. It was just fundamental to us. So fundamentally, people who were relating to this were sensitive, but not sensitive just as in I have a lot of emotions. They were attuned to vibrations, right? They were attuned to the subtle level of reality. They were tuned to caring about how other people felt. And so that's just a natural inclination. It's like Vanessa-ing. It's what it is. I attune to how people are. That's what I do. Then it becomes a coping strategy, because one thing I've noticed, in being an empath is in part, it's because I cared about people, right? So here I am, I'm paying good attention. I'm little. I notice my parents are suffering quite a bit, right? You notice your family system suffering quite a bit. Most children, I really believe, just want everyone to be happy. They just don't get it when people are not, and they really want that for them. So out of love for my family, I wanted everyone to be happy. And so part of my coping strategy developed to help others, right? And then part of it was your distress is distressing me, right? Your loud noises, your fighting, your pain, your inability to connect, your tendency to project, these things are hurting me. And so I want to manage the situation, make you all smile, make you all laugh, make you all feel better so that I can rest, right? And I can finally feel at ease. And so this becomes a little bit of a way of being. Now, it's very easy as a psychologist, we can think about that as at a psychological level. Okay. So we can say, all right, Vanessa grew up in this hyper intense traumatic household. There was a lot of fighting, a lot of pain happening. So she developed a coping strategy that decided she was going to solve everybody's problems and have no boundaries, so she didn't create more conflict. But it's not just at a cognitive level. It's not just conceptual, and it's actually not just behavioral. And I think this is the part that can really confound us as empaths. It's probably most of you listening are already deep in some personal exploration. So you probably got at some point that saying no is a healthy thing, and that you don't have to give everything to everybody. And yet, two things may happen. You may still find yourself doing it anyway, despite your better knowing. And that's where I think some of these belief systems that are unconscious come in. And you may notice that despite your best efforts, you're still absorbing everyone's energy, taking on people's feelings, feeling overstimulated, overwhelmed. And I think that's because of the energetic component. That's because it's I guess we forget that we're energy beings.
Yeah, totally.
Right?
Yeah.
We forget, we keep living up in our minds in a way that's okay, if I just decide how to behave better, things will be different. But there was even a point, I'd be working with clients, I'd do all the management techniques, ground my feet, say a prayer, give it up to God. I'd have, put light around you. I'd have all of these different techniques. And I knew better. I knew like, it's not my job to fix anyone. I'd repeat the mantras, like all of it. And nevertheless, I'd leave the session feeling what they were feeling. Mm-hmm. And so that was when we started to look more into Judith's work and I started to do those meditations, realizing that my coping strategy was not just cognitive, but that it was energetic. And that what I did on a very subtle level was I opened the front of my body. I removed like a sense of boundary and skin, and I just kind of merged into my ecosystem so that I could really connect with everybody's energy fields, because that's the quickest way for me to have picked up on information, right? So I could be a first responder to it. Energetic people have all sorts of different ways, but I think it's just very, very helpful to understand that these coping strategies are not just cognitive. They're not just conceptual. They happen on a physical level. They happen where you create constrictions, like we've talked about in other episodes, and they happen in the way that you pattern your energy body.
Yeah. Yes. Like the felt experience of the physicality of this, and like how you can learn to really inhabit yourself, which is what the realization process is so good at teaching. That makes such a difference. And I think I talked about this in a different episode, but my experience with the realization process, like let's say in the training week, when I really land in myself, which is becoming more and more my most of the time for sure. So I can notice it in my Rolfing practice. You know, I see a bunch of clients every week, so I get a chance to really watch this in action. Or I'm a mom, you know, with my son. Certainly we get really meshy with our children, so you can really watch your tendencies there. But when I'm really in myself, when I'm really inhabiting myself, what I notice is that my love for the person that I'm with, whether it's a Rolfing client or my son or people I pass on the street, you know, when we make that little moment of eye contact, maybe say good morning, maybe not because it's New England. But what I notice is that from the space inside of myself, I feel so much love and compassion for people from inside myself. When have not been able to be inside of myself, which is the history of most of my life, what I actually feel is overwhelmed and at the mercy of the world. And I feel too much. Everything feels like literally sensation too much, all that kind of solar plexus, heart. And then I feel like I need to defend. And then I notice that I'm kind of doing all the stuff that I've done over the years, you know, micro clenching my jaw, micro raising my shoulders, micro tensing my neck, micro gripping at the heart. Because my strategy for overwhelm for so many years, unconsciously, energetically was, well, then make a barrier. And so it's like I was not in my body. I was like, I mean, it was, but I was out there overwhelmed by the world and yet creating these densities in my body with this idea that it would protect me from the overwhelm. But what I find is that the opposite has been completely true. When I deeply land in myself, I don't feel the need to constrict, and I just feel so in love with the world, as opposed to like cold, shut down, like, I don't need to take care of you. You can take care of yourself. You know, your business is not my business. It doesn't feel like that at all. It's like so much love and respect for people doing their own thing. You know, you're Vanessa-ing, guy passing on the street when I walk to the grocery stores, doing his thing. My Rolfing clients, right, everyone's just doing their thing. It's so beautiful from that perspective.
Sure. It's a complete liberation to feel like it's not your business. And I was thinking while you were talking, so one of our listeners commented on this Adya Ashanti quote that I shared at the beginning when I shared it on social media. And what they said was totally relating, and such a hard thing to change without feeling like an uncaring jerk face.
Yes. And I think we all go through that as we make this transition. And it's the symptom of the fact that there's really active pain bodies at play there, which say to get love, whatever it is for each person, although I don't think our pain bodies are so unique, which we've been talking about a lot lately. In order to get love, I have to take care of everyone. I'm not worthy of love, so I'm the caretaker. The world is overwhelming. The world is unsafe. Whatever the belief systems are that put it in place in the first place.
I know. I was reading through some research, and it was it Richard Davidson, and they were talking about burnout, which is so common for people in the quote unquote helping fields, right, in the healthcare and helping fields. And they were distinguishing between, there's a term they use called compassion fatigue. It's kind of a common term in the psychological world that's examining burnout. And they were saying that actually the research is pointing to more of an empathy burnout than a compassion fatigue. And really what they distinguished is that empathy is this sense of like actual emotional resonance, right? Like where you feel somebody's feelings. In a way, it's hard to distinguish because sometimes they'll use that same kind of definition for compassion. But what I was sort of taking from it, applying through my own experience with Judith's work and the meditations and embodiment, is that when I can inhabit the space of my own body, and as Judith would say, know myself as fundamental consciousness, which is this much more subtle vibrational experience than energy. And I think we should talk about that. I think that might have been confusing last week. I got one listener's
in the energy episode.
Yeah. So let's circle back to that in a second. But when I could know myself, inhabit my body, and kind of feel my spaciousness, right? Then I can feel and sense other people's feelings. Judith would say, see, feel. And that's what it's like. It's like see, feel. You don't know how you're feeling it, but you are. And yet the difference is you don't feel they're your own. So that there's this real clarity that arises that's like, this isn't me. And with this idea of empathy fatigue, it's like you're resonating in such a way, and yet you don't have a consciousness like this isn't mine. Mm-hmm. And Adia sort of pointed at that too. And a lot of sensitive people will describe that experience, walking into a room, being at a party, talking to a coworker, talking to their loved one, whatever it is. All of a sudden they're feeling anxious or angry or disappointed, and they can't even separate. We were talking about this last week, like mine, yours. Mm-hmm. It's almost indistinguishable because they're listening, like the pattern of how they move and exist and listen is not inhabiting the space of their own body. It's picking up and kind of merging into the field in a way that makes the field indistinguishable from you. So we have this kind of belief system that to have boundaries is rude.
I know, especially women get that so much. It's so weird. I mean, weird is a mild term for what it is.
And it's like, so we have the obvious level, right, that you're just referring to. And then I remember when I was in Bali and I was talking to a teacher, and he was somebody who worked with energy very intimately and the energy of the land, quite an amazing guy. I've referenced him before. And he taught me a lot of energetic boundary techniques, like a lot of these ones that we were just describing. In Buddhism, they'll do a lot of like seeing rainbow colored lights around you and like swirling things. I mean, actually, they have very beautiful visualizations for how you create energetic boundaries. And he was describing them to me. And I remember being like, but if I had all of those boundaries around me, how am I supposed to feel what's happening with my clients? Like, I have to feel it. Now, that to me was a very normal statement to make. Like, it's my job to feel people's feelings. Like, I'm somebody who works with feelings. I'm a counselor. Like, I have to feel their feelings. And the way that I feel it is by not having boundaries. I never realized there was a problem in that statement. He, of course, did. And he said from the Buddhist perspective that you set boundaries, you set boundaries, you set boundaries until essentially your heart and your mind were so open, so connected to oneness that you realized that instead of absorbing, you could radiate. And then you didn't need to anymore. So isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
But it's another more fancy description of fundamental consciousness, because with fundamental consciousness, when you're inhabiting the space of your body, you radiate from your core. Not like you don't radiate by opening up your guts and like pouring your light out into the world.
Right.
Right? It's a different thing. But who knew that what I was saying was wrong? I didn't understand that I could feel what was happening in others. I could have a point of empathy and still stay within myself and still exist and have skin and have a boundary. And I was so wired for this kind of sacrificial opening up to the world so that I can like be more effective, quote unquote, because I can like really know what's happening to them and really empathize with them. I didn't even realize that it's a bit of a martyr pattern, that it's like, let me open up my veins and give it to you.
Yep. It's, as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking that maybe we've come at this from two different places. There's lots of similarities, as we both know, because we've known each other a long time, but yours is more of the sacrificial, like go out, open the veins kind of thing. And mine is almost more like this, like I picture a little periscope coming out of the water and like going out and scanning for safety while barricading the fortress. Like I've become the more density person. That's been historically my pattern, which is why, you know, I'm a rolfer. Like I needed somebody to figure out how to take the armor off, literally, because I was very, very, very armored. And it was this year that I can't remember how it came to me. It kind of came in dribbles and all different moments. It wasn't some big like aha instantaneous thing, but that, so with the work we've been doing, Dharma Ocean, meditating with the body, Judith Blackstone, realization process, and certainly all of our work with Cure and Trace. I feel more in my body, and I'm a pretty big body feeler. Like that's not news to me that I can feel sensation in my body, but I could really feel my heart and solar plexus, really feel what was going on there in a way that I just hadn't tracked before. And I could feel the way that I defended it, created densities around it. And then I had this experience where it's like I could feel stuff, like you're talking about this almost being hijacked by your environment, feeling other people's stuff kind of coming at me. And I could watch me defend by doing my normal dance of like restricting and constricting and building up armoring. And then I realized, oh, it hurts. It hurts when it comes in and it hits the restriction. The thing that hurts is actually the restriction. This might sound weird unless people, because it's an experiential thing, but I'm going to try talking through it because we have a lot of senseys in there who can really feel well. So this might be an experience you have. So as I've done the work of letting go of the densities, I still have boundaries. I'm still have skin. I'm in my own body. In fact, more so than ever because I'm not running. I'm not evading. So if something comes in from the environment now, and Judith does with the throwing a pea, an imaginary energetic pea throwing through, I can have the experience of it just goes through. Like it's not mine. I don't have to hold it for them. I don't have to defend against it. And it was this really wild thing to discover the safest possible place for me to be is wide open. Not wide open in the spilling out, opening the veins way, but wide open in the fully inhabiting my body, landed in myself, and I'm not constricting against. Like, that's so safe. How can I possibly be? And you had this too when we were at the realization process, like, oh, nothing can be taken from me. Look, I exist. I have boundaries. I have skin and bones and tissue and cells, and the cells have cell walls. Like, it has so much intelligence to it. And these things, emotions, static, or whatever in the environment, can just go through. That sounds a little, it's like all of these things do. Talking it out loud is a little like, yeah. But having a landing in it experience of it is like, wow. Especially if you've been a defender your whole life and you realize the safest thing in the world is to let go of the armoring.
Sure, because I've been an evacuator my whole life, and I realize the safest thing in the world is not to evacuate.
Right, exactly. It's like, oh, that's pretty startling when you live it, when you land in it.
I know, it's crazy. I remember years back, I saw one of my favorite energy workers. Her name's Holly Starr. And I was asking her about this pattern of absorbing because I was teaching at Pacific College, acupuncturists at the time. And a lot of them were absorbing their clients' pain and suffering. Like a client would come in with a knee problem. They would leave. The practitioner had a knee problem. And like this was just happening all the time. And I was asking her kind of like, how do you not absorb energy? Because also I was doing it. And I remember her saying like, energy is just energy. I mean, it moves, right? Like energy is not a concrete thing. It only sticks in you when it's got something to stick to.
Yeah. If there's Velcro, it sticks.
If there's Velcro, right? Which are the belief systems, which are these constrictions, which are these places where we're still patterning without recognizing that, we're God or we're one, or that we're fundamental consciousness, if you want to use Judith's language, and that leaves something to stick to. And so energy sticks, right? And that the more you have this realization of your essential nature, there's just less gluiness. Like, as you said, the restriction was creating the pain. It would come in and it would hit you there. And I thought maybe I can read this little bit by Judith, if you don't mind, because maybe it can clarify. Okay. She says, although sensitivity may cause discomfort, it's an entryway into life's spiritual dimension. Sensitive people sometimes try to make themselves more solid or dense, aka you,
me,
or to shut themselves off from the onslaught of stimuli in their daily lives. However, the cure for this discomfort is to actually become more sensitive and open. As you continue to develop your sensitivity, your consciousness can become so refined that it is finally the luminous transparency of fundamental consciousness pervading the material world. When this happens, stimuli can move through this dimension of consciousness without disturbing it. As fundamental consciousness, you remain steady and open while the movement of life flows through you. This means that you can continue to become even more subtly attuned to life without being overwhelmed by the world around you. Attunement to fundamental consciousness also helps you tolerate stimuli in your environment because it requires you to inhabit your body. When you live within your body, you have a felt sense of internal depth and wholeness. You can also feel the qualities of your being, such as love, understanding, and power. This is an experience of actually existing and possessing yourself from the inside. This internal depth, wholeness, and quality of being cannot be broken. Stimuli move through it without altering it. As your senses become refined, as you reach the subtle range of your senses, they also become unified. The vibrational nature of reality that is revealed with your subtle senses is seen, heard, touched, smelled, tasted all at once. Finally, as you realize yourself as fundamental consciousness, you have a single direct experience of each moment. All sensory stimuli seem to emerge directly out of the pervasive, empty spaciousness of your consciousness without any effort on your part. This produces the feeling of immediacy or nowness that's associated with spiritual experience.
I love it.
I know. Yum, right?
For everyone listening, what I would like to say as we're heading towards wrap-up moment is that this is because, right, we're the get it right culture. Oh, I'm doing it wrong, and now I'm going to get it right. That's not what we're saying. And this stuff is so intimately wired into us. Like this arrived, like you said, probably it was, I think definitely was an aptitude we just showed up with. And then we had an environment where it was required and it became distorted. So you'll figure it out imperfectly. Let yourself figure it out imperfectly. But I invite you to be willing. And if you're tired enough, and when you get tired enough, you will be willing to see if you can put it down. And the things that help are what we're talking about, the realization process with Judith Blackstone. How do you actually land in yourself? What is embodiment, which is a word that I'm seeing in my field get ruined, has been ruined, doesn't mean anything anymore. And it doesn't matter. The word doesn't matter because what we're talking about is a lived experience that cannot be labeled. So that's a great resource. And then just these cognitive ideas, just questioning, is it true? Is it true that I'm a bad person if I'm not the helper? Is it true that it's rude to say no? And Byron Katie, I think, does a really good job in her book. I can't remember which one, but she just talks about whose business is it? She says there's only 3 kinds of business in the world: my business, other people's business, and God's business. And I think what Byron Katie knows and what she didn't write in her book, because she was writing it for the population, is that it's all God's business. And I can tell you that is for fucking real true. First F-bomb of the episode, by the way.
Maybe we're maturing.
Maybe we're so grown up. But until you have a lived experience of, it's all God's experience, it's just helpful to sift around. Like, is it my business? And you'll be amazed if you're open the floodgates, leave your body, go out, save the world type, how little of it is your business. And then there might be grief. There might be grief for that lost identity, and that's okay. But these things are worth getting curious about and playing with for a life that just feels more nourishing and less draining, and where you get to actually have this deep communion with people in the world that's a lot more profound than kind of running around putting out other people's and your own fires.
I remember having this moment when I was in therapy 10 years or so ago. And I was really sad and grief-stricken over how much I perceived my parents as suffering, and I remember it feeling really shocking that I couldn't do anything about that, that I couldn't fix it somehow or make it better for them, which is quite natural. And many people feel that way. We hate to see people we love suffering. And if there was anything we could do, we want to do it, and I remember really being in pain over it. Like, what do you mean there's nothing I can do? I mean, they're suffering. I have to do something. It's what I'm here for, just really in the thick of my pain body on it. And then I had this revelation that I don't know, my parents are 30 something years older than me. They had survived the death of their parents. They had survived the birth of 3 kids. They had survived tough times. And I was like, wow, you know what? There's a way I'm undermining them.
Yeah.
And their path. And that's not even from a spiritual level. That's just the pure psychology of humans and who am I to make their suffering my business? My parents choose to stay together because family was everything to them. That's just a value system, and that's their value system. And who am I to second guess their value system and say they should have done it differently? And then if we got into a more spiritual level, who am I to question God? And I don't know what they're here for in this lifetime. And I don't know, what they're trying to unravel for themselves. And sure, it looks painful, but it's not my business.
Yeah.
Because I can't know, and because I can't do.
Right.
Because I can't fix it. And because I can't understand from that level of mind where I'm struggling to get an answer as to why they're doing what they're doing, and then that fix it, that solution, and I think as we can start to have some of that inquiry that you were describing, Brooke, just even till today, I mean, you all heard me, if you've been listening, go through the mold episode and having to leave Florida. Even then, I still felt responsible for them suffering. Mm-hmm. That's how thick the issue of enmeshment is in my lifetime, right? For me, that I'm so wired to believe it's my job to make other people okay, feel okay. And that I'm a total disappointment and selfish prick if I disrupt their harmony, right? So it's very, very deep, and it doesn't just change overnight. It has softened and softened and softened, and it's looser. From that place 10 years ago where I was so identified with that belief, I couldn't even understand there was another belief. What is happening? What are you saying to me? It's not my job. Of course it's my job. To now where I can see every movement. I have clarity. It's not mine. yet there's still patterning and there's still behavioral, like unconscious behavior and pain body triggers. So a lot of softness, a lot of recognizing that these things don't tend to just dissolve like overnight. They tend to kind of soften and lighten and brighten and unwind, in this beautiful pattern. And then, as you said, I guess, sometimes it must be frustrating when you listen to us and you're like, okay, but what's the answer? And we did point you in the direction of a couple of things. Maybe Brooke, you and I can, if people are interested, lead a Judith Blackstone meditation, just one. So people can know what that's like. So if you're interested, you can give us a little nod to that on social media or email us or whatever at Dear Bliss and Grit. No, Dear at Bliss and Grit. But in a way, kind of to me, the main point, since this is such a journey and you need to find your teachers and your path and your way with it, was to tell you that there's hope, that you don't have to spend the rest of your life managing and using all of your attention and your energy on how to stay safe and stay okay, that you could just make your life circumstances better. Like the way I shared the story once, like I was telling Kieran how my sensitivity was like two sides of a coin and it was a gift, but it came baked in with all these challenges. And she was like, yeah, that's because you think it's a problem. So you don't align your life around who you are. And I'm like, oh,
I didn't see that underpinning. Yeah.
No, but that is intelligent, right? Like, if you live in the middle of New York City and you're sensitive and you work on a trading floor, like, guess what?
You're going to flame out.
You're going to have a lot of problems. Yeah. But take that same person and, put them in like a pastoral setting in like Southern California and let them work from home as an entrepreneur. And they're probably going to have a different experience of themselves in life. So there's hope because as you recognize you're not pathological, you're beautiful, you're divine, you're sacred, and you are as you meant to be, you can realign your life in support of yourself. And then B, as you learn to inhabit your body and exist, these things are less and less problematic. They really are. So mostly I just wanted to plant some seeds that there's hope that you don't have to spend the rest of your life managing.
Thank you so much for listening to today's show. The show notes, including any resources we mentioned, live at blissandgrit.com. If you go to the website and scroll down, you're going to see each episode's separate post and the resources in there. You can support the show a few different ways. You can write us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or our Facebook page, which is Bliss and Grit. You can tell your somatic, spiritual, sensey friends that the show exists. And you can subscribe on our website, which is blissandgrit.com, to hear about any upcoming events we might have. We support the show by working individually with clients. So if you're wanting more support on your path, you can also see how to work with us for coaching or spiritual mentoring or whatever you want to call it on blissandgrit.com. Huge gratitude to those of you who have written reviews already. Here's one from L. Koppel. I find this podcast to be so refreshing and easy to listen to. Vanessa and Brooke take an infinitely complex subject and break it down in a way that is approachable and relatable. They're vulnerable in sharing their own pain and struggles and describe how the bliss and grit in their own lives have shaped their spiritual journeys. I look forward to each new episode, and I feel I've gained so much clarity and insight about my own spiritual path because of this podcast. We're so glad. Thank you so much for that. And we'll be back next week.